The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Never Take Off the Mask, Ryan Luis Rodriguez presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Rodriguez.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People vs. The Lone Ranger, a 2013 neo-Western action-adventure film that follows an unlikely alliance between a lawman and a Native American warrior as they embark on a quest for justice in the Old West. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always, in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Maynard Bangs, you are representing the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Your Honor, distinguished members of the court, where is my John Wayne? Where is my prairie song?
No, please stop.
Where is my happy ending?
Oh, God.
Where have all the cowboys gone?
Oh, God, there's that mistrial we were talking about.
The great Paula Cole asked this question of us nigh on 30 years ago, and we've been looking for the answer ever since. Where have all the cowboys gone? Well, Paula, I can tell you where all the cowboys have certainly not gone, and that's to see this almost 2.5 hour long snooze fest. This Pirates of the Caribbean wannabe, cowboys and Indians dress up playing waste of $250 million. As soon as this movie was announced and the cast was revealed, the public collectively looked at one another and shook their heads, nah. I just can't believe nobody in their right mind somewhere in the studio came to their senses at some point in the process of producing this film and said, oh, dear God in heaven, what in the name of sweet baby Jesus are we doing here? Stop everything. Stop fucking everything. We're not going through with this. I will elaborate further on my points and hope to involve even more Paula Cole. I thank you.
God, I hope not. Thank you, Mr. Bangs. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Mike Natale. Please present your opening statement.
Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, and come with us to yesteryear. Witness a real Brooklyn podcaster born in the 1990s, the greatest show on earth. Yes, I've been around a long time, forgotten many things, many faces. Forgotten that this podcast doesn't have a video portion, so dressing up in a full Lone Ranger costume in my office, even though no one else can see it, is a total waste of time. But memory is what we need to talk about today. How perception shapes memories, and how our memories shape perceptions. Back when the West was still wild, when men like Buffalo Bill and Wyatt Earp still walked the plains, a vicious dust cloud rolled through the West, a storm known as newspaper reports of troubled productions. And being a troubled production is a lot like living with a killing in the Great Western Chain. Right or wrong, it's a brand that sticks. Now revered films like Buster Keaton's The General and D.W. Griffith's Intolerance were ripped apart in the press for blowing budgets on extravagant displays and flopped at the box office as a result. And it took nearly 100 years for these films to shake off the stain of the public perception of costly disaster and be seen with clean eyes as the thrilling displays of practical movie magic we now know they are. Today, I'm here to argue that The Lone Ranger is also such a film. Only its chance at redemption after the stain of troubled production has been stifled yet again by the scandals involving its cast. When our views of the film itself are mired by past stories of its troubled production and the future behavior of its stars, our sight is too clouded to see the film for what it actually is. What I'm asking today is to divorce the film from those mires, to merely speak of it as a work in and of itself. When you do so, when you, as medieval French Rabbi Rashi once said, receive with simplicity everything that happens to you, you'll find a film that's not nearly as bad as it was made out to be.
Nearly. That's a very interesting word. Thank you, Mr. Natale. Mr. Bangs, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
I am familiar with the rapping rabbi, Raffi. So I can't avoid the elephant in the room. We have to talk about the obvious. Army Hammer eats people. He does it for fun. There. I tried to talk around it as long as I could.
3 minutes. Very impressive.
It's time to get right to the heart of the matter. Literal people alive. But also, we have to talk about Johnny Depp's casting as the Comanche character, Tonto. This is the hottest button in this hot button issue. Definitely the talking point surrounding this film and its release. And why should I avoid it? Why is a white man like Johnny Depp playing a Native American character like Tonto? Now, I don't know if as a court we're able to decide here today that an actor should always play the race of their character. That's not really for me or us in this court to decide. But what I do know is that when makeup is a crucial part in making it happen, that's usually a bad sign. If you ask Johnny Depp, he believes his portrayal in this film is doing some service to the cause of Native Americans. He told Entertainment Weekly, when the idea came up for the movie, I started thinking about Tonto and what could be done in my own small way to try to eliminate isn't possible, but reinvent the relationship, to attempt to take some of the ugliness thrown on the Native Americans, not only in The Lone Ranger, but the way Indians were treated throughout history of cinema, and turn it on its head. Director Gore Verbinski has added they were looking to make the character of Tonto relevant. So those are the stated goals of the filmmakers going into this project. And in Depp's eyes, this film, particularly Tonto's role in it, it's some kind of reappraisal, a redemption for the Native American character. That sounds very nice, but wouldn't that have been just as possible with a Native American actor? Do Native Americans now need Johnny Depp's pity? I don't have to tell you the bad optics of a white man who views himself as some kind of white savior for Native Americans everywhere.
Mr. Natale, does this turn anything on its head?
I don't think so. I mean, I remember that in the run-up to the film, and I think we might all recall that Johnny Depp claimed Native American ancestry. Now, of course, the idea of who is allowed to claim or not claim Native American ancestry and where we draw the line as to who has that lineage is a very, very dicey topic that is very, very contentious today within the indigenous community. So I, as a definitely clear as day white man, will not speak to that because people within the community have different feelings one way or the other, and I don't want to tread on that. But what I will say is that is what Depp claimed at the time. And of course, the remainder of the cast is indigenous. And I do think that with that regard, this is all, as I said in my opening statement, it's a matter of perception, right? And it's a matter of
what we're willing objection. You say the remainder of the cast is indigenous? Army Hammer?
No, as in who are playing the indigenous roles, to be clear.
Oh, okay. Can you name any of those characters?
Can I name any of the characters? No, but okay. I mean, that's that. I at that point, I don't know. What are we? What are we driving at?
Is my point.
Okay,
they're not really characters. They're more like props. They're extras.
Ooh.
I think that's reductive. I don't know if I think that I'm not going to sit here and say that they're the main characters of the film or anything to that degree, but I do think there's more going on than to just call them props or extras. But again, this is what I'm saying. In these matters, the way that we're discussing this, it really is simply that comes down to just a matter of how much you're willing to give a thing, right? I mean, when we're having a conversation here about this, I mean, we can talk about the finished product and whether or not it works, and I'm happy to do that. But when we're discussing intent, there's very little that we can do to persuade someone on necessarily intent. Now, you, in the way that you described the way that Depp and Bruckheimer and Verbinski talked about the way that they wanted to treat the indigenous characters in this film, spoke of that as though it was insincere or whether they failed to do that or what have you. And I at least buy the fact that is sincere. The film does go to efforts to kind of include what is kind of the classic Tonto elements while still acknowledging that most of that was made up by a bunch of white radio writers in the 30s and finds that little conceit of, yeah, Tonto talks like that because his brain's kind of messed up from watching his whole tribe get slaughtered, and that's the rest of us are not that way. This is not, this is not how we behave. Whether that's successful or not, we can debate that. But I think when it comes down to intention, I think the whole issue with this film, and you brought it up in your opening statement, the minute the casting was announced, everybody went, oh, how are we doing this? And so by the time it actually hit the screen, we kind of already knew how we felt about this, myself included. I didn't see it until it was on Blu-ray because I just went, well, surely that's going to be bad. Everybody says it's bad. And when you actually watch it, there's definitely a sincerity in there in how it wants to approach things and how it wants to depict the way that this country was built on the blood of non-white people in callous and cruel ways. So again, if we're going to talk about whether it's successful or not, that's one thing. But to question the intent, I think there's no real winning in that regard. Whether, you know, you can basically say, I'm willing to believe that they had the best intentions, or I'm willing to believe that this was craven. And at what point what can we really gain from that? It's just a matter of whether you want to view something optimistically or pessimistically.
Well, I'm not supposing what their intentions are. I'm taking their word for it. These are things they said in interviews.
Well, but I'm saying the way you described it made it sound like that was not necessarily sincere. I think, and so do you think that they sincerely are you suggesting
if their intentions were wholeheartedly to shift the paradigm on Native American characters, break out of stereotypes, prove they can take on different roles, then they absolutely utterly failed. And the film is evidence for that, right? One, your Native American character that you have is not played by someone with Native American ancestry. I understand he claimed it. He's done nothing to prove that. So I have a feeling he's a member of the same tribe as Elizabeth Warren. You know, so so he's not able to prove that. And it's not me just calling it out. These are Native American activists who are calling him out, who are saying, well, if you say you're a member of a tribe, prove it. And he hasn't been able to. So anyway, I what I'm saying is it comes off insincere to me. I mean, you're talking about them. They're telling the story of the backs upon, you know, who this country was built. There's, you know, a couple of scenes with some Chinese railroad builders. They really get no lines or characters. All they talk about is like an Indian ghost, and then they get shot and they're dead. They're in the movie for 30 seconds. This is who the movie is supposed to be telling the story of. As far as the Native Americans, there's one Cherokee actor in this movie. He has no speaking lines whatsoever. He just simply looks at the camera, angry a couple of times. And all of the Native Americans are slaughtered in this huge scene where Johnny Depp is mugging for laughs on a handcart. While for the second time in his life, all of his people are dying around him. This should be a powerful moment. Instead, it's played for laughs. So I'm saying that the evidence of what they've said they intend to do versus what we see on the screen actually happening, there is a disconnect there. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about intention.
I mean, of course, that's. I mean, I just in you know where I'm looking. Of course, I'm not suggesting that the film is meant to take the point of view of those characters in any way, but I do think that there is a dicey and difficult thing anytime you're trying to do the Western in modern day, because we have to reconcile with all of the horrors of westward expansion. And I just, in my point of view, when I'm watching the film, for me, there is at least an effort made and an attempt made to reconcile with that. Now, whether or not it was successful to satisfy any individual person is its own thing, but I think, you know, where I'm at with this and with regard to the film, I think there is a discussion to be had with, the choice of casting with Depp and how he chooses to, or how he identified versus the accuracy of that. As for the topic that you started with, I believe you said Armie Hammer, I believe you indicated eats people. Was your
He may or may not eat people. The jury is out on that.
With that, and that's one of my points of contention with this as well. I in my own life, when I'm not representing films in a courtroom, I have a show where I discuss classic cinema, and I'm always wary, having looked at the history of film, I'm always wary of times where people try and I'm not necessarily an advocate for separate the art from the artist per se, but I am an advocate for the idea of we should not let the fact that a person involved in a work of art is a bad person kind of cast the shadow over the art itself.
Oh yeah,
in terms
let
of...
me clarify. My Army Hammer stuff is just jokes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
That's not really why the movie's guilty.
Of course.
We've really gone far afield with this, so I'm just going to wrap this up.
I think we are afield right now. We're in the field. But yeah, my point is, my Army Hammer, that's just jokes.
Okay.
Johnny Depp being whitewashing this character Tonto, who granted is a character with a history of whitewashing.
Yeah, it's mostly been Italians, really.
And that's what I want to kind of move into. Besides the fact that Johnny Depp is cast as this character in itself is incredibly problematic. So if you put this character, as we see it on the screen, on someone else, even maybe on an actual Comanche actor, I think you've still got a problem. He's a problematic character. Throughout his many incarnations and representations, he's always been based on one bad stereotype or another, whether he was an old, incompetent, bumbling fool who was always in need of rescuing, or the youthful young warrior known for talking in pidgin English. I'm glad that's pulled back a lot in this film. His, me, Tonto. That's pulled back, but it's there. It's there just a little bit. So in an article for Time entitled "Johnny Depp as Tonto, is the Lone Ranger Racist?" Activist Adrian Keene is quoted as saying, "I had a teensy tiny bit of hope that this wouldn't be another othering, stereotype-filled horror, but clearly I was so wrong." So despite Tonto's problematic history and the opportunity presented to these filmmakers to shift and flip that on its head, like they said they wanted to do, this version of Tonto presents all the same problematic hallmarks of the older versions. He's mystical, mysterious, he's wild, he's unpredictable, his face paint is dehumanizing. In an article for the Los Angeles Times entitled "The Lone Ranger, Johnny Depp's Tonto Proves Divisive," Professor Hane Gogama said it's hard to invest positive thoughts in a character that looks like a Halloween Gothic creation. It's hard to get into a cooperative adventure with someone with darkened eyes and a taxidermic bird on his head. So this character, he's not exactly a hero here, right? I mean, half the movie he's glum, he doesn't want to help. It turns out he got most of his people killed. And so it's just sort of a dark character that I think the word othering was well used by Keene, as that the character is very otherworldly and mysterious. I think it holds up the stereotypes of Tonto and Native American characters in general.
I mean, I'll be quite frank. I'm as I stressed before, a very very white Italian man. So it's difficult for me to necessarily speak to that, other than the fact that a lot of Italian guys have played Tonto in a very problematic manner. Now, I think, like, I'm when it comes to representation on screen, it's a difficult topic per se. I guess. In terms of, there are certain people, Navajo Nation leaders were on the set of this film acting as advisors, right? And in that capacity. So there are people who were involved with this film, or people who watched this film who felt that, okay, this is actually a step forward. And there were other people who watched it and felt, well, this is problematic, this is offensive, and so on and so forth. I'm not certainly, as happy as I am to sit here and talk about the merits of the filmmaking, I'm not in a position, nor would I want to be, the kind of person that comes in and starts telling people whether or not they should be offended by things, right?
That is my job, however.
This is what I'm saying. Like,
be offended by things, and also these are not my words. That's why I'm careful to pull quotes from other people who are in a position of knowing. And are saying, hey, this is not cool. Now, you brought in the consultants. You're right. They brought in consultants from the Comanche Nation.
Navajo Nation, right?
And Navajo Nation, yeah. I'm sure, as well. But, I mean, the characters are Comanche, so I sure hope they talk to some Comanches. Look at Johnny Depp's character design anyway, right? It's based on a painting called I Am Crow, right? It's not tied to a traditional Navajo or Comanche paint or garb or anything. It's based on a painting from a non-Native American artist that is purely from their imagination, right? So, that's the kind of example. You've got Johnny Depp saying, one way we're going to pay homage to Native Americans, we're going to bring on consultants to keep things accurate, And at the other hand, we're going to, totally throw the garb and the paint out the window. Tonto's going to do whatever he wants, which I'll get to. I want to get to that in my next point.
Please do.
I'm still ready to talk about Tonto. Because they have that scapegoat that was mentioned earlier that, Tonto's crazy, right? So, to me, this is like an escape hatch from these accusations by framing Tonto's behavior as being symptoms of something like PTSD. His guilt from having sold out his entire tribe, getting them killed, has essentially, according to the Comanche chief we see in the film, played by Saginaw Grant, who isn't Comanche, by the way, he's a member of the Sac and Fox Nation. Anyway, according to Saginaw, Tonto is nuts. He's crazy. So all the Spirit Walker stuff is supposedly complete nonsense, the film says. That's why his paint and clothing is so non-traditional and not associated to any real tribe. That's why he makes up all this Wendigo stuff. So it doesn't matter that Wendigos are actually associated with Eastern woodland tribes and not Comanches. That's okay because Tonto is crazy, you see? The film tells you to put no stake in anything you see him say or do. And you can see that such little care was put in the representation of this culture that to claim this movie is supposed to be some kind of redemption or reimagining is complete bullshit. And, and of course they say Tonto is just nuts, but we see Tonto communicate successfully with a horse and help bring the Lone Ranger back to life. We see him transform into a bird and seemingly have trans-dimensional powers when it comes to, trading things, right? We see him trade the young boy in the wraparound segment in the beginning. He trades him a bag of peanuts. And then we see in the flashback, in the past, Tonto trade away the same bag. So either he's lying as he narrates the story to the young boy, and therefore he's lying to us too, or he's magic, but he isn't crazy. Not that Indians are crazy is a better optic. Not that some Indians are just as complicit in their tribe's destruction as any white man is better optics. There's so many problems with this Tonto character. I probably could keep going. I got to see if I might actually. I think I got one more about Tonto.
Go, man, go.
Well, this movie's all about Tonto. To me, I don't see the Lone Ranger as really he's there, but he's more the sidekick. Tonto, he's Johnny Depp. He's the main guy in this movie. He is the main character. He has a lot more of an arc, too, about him trying to get redemption for his tribe's destruction than Armie Hammer, who kind of just doesn't want to die, does die, and then decides to get revenge.
I mean, should I respond now? I know you said you had another Tonto point, but I'm happy to take.
No,
on
I'll sit on Tonto for a minute. Okay. I can keep going back to Tonto. I got.
Look, I'll say this. Part of this struggle I might be having now is the film that you just described, where you said Tonto is the main character. It's all about Tonto. The Lone Ranger isn't really a character. I can only say that's not the film that I've watched. In a sense, to me, that is John Reed and his story, and Tonto obviously is the narrator and the character that's carrying us through it. And I guess if you want to have a debate about whether, he's the main character or the Lone Ranger is the main character just because Tonto is the one narrating it and he's our point of view on it, is, I guess, kind of the same as debating whether or not Gatsby is the protagonist of The Great Gatsby. But I do think that in what you're describing, and again, talking about the Tonto thing, with the mysticism, you're right. They have characters saying, well, he's crazy, but then the film drops little hints that, well, maybe he's not making this all up. Maybe there is some kind of mystical thing that he is tapped into. Now, the most cynical interpretation of that, which you're describing, is well, is he crazy or not? Because if he's crazy, then we have to conclude this or that. And I always liked the fact that the film does kind of have that ambiguity to it, in the same manner that, when I watch Matrix 2, and people pop up and go, Morpheus, you're wrong. There is no one. Neo's not magic. I don't sit back and go, well, the movie's telling me Neo's not magic, but I've seen him do magic. This is confusing. No, I understand that there's a bit of ambiguity there, and we're supposed to kind of question that. So I personally, when I'm watching the film, I understand the line they're trying to straddle with that, and the idea of kind of leaving you in question of well, how much is this character, because we're hearing it from his narration in a framing device that I'm going to put this out there right now, I will fully concede is dreadful little big man knockoff. I will defend a lot of this film, but not the framing device. Anyway,
just talking about the wraparound narration stuff in general.
Yeah, pretty. Yeah.
It feels tacked on.
The little big man stuff is weird.
It feels tacked on. It feels like somebody told him to do that later.
I mean, I suppose, though, in that regard, like, we're dealing with, number one, an unreliable narrator, and number two, we're dealing with a narrative device that relies on the idea of keeping you in suspense throughout the thing of whether or not that magic is real, and I don't think that that's any different, and this is a better film that I'm evoking, but, I'm not going to necessarily be outraged that Miracle on 34th Street doesn't necessarily confirm to me whether or not he's Santa, but then at the end, it's like, well, how did they get the house and the stuff got there? That's just a common narrative trope, and I don't necessarily know if that's the biggest thing to knock it for, because so many films and films that we all love and agree on do that as well.
But I think Miracle on 34th Street keeps it ambiguous. Nothing that happens is impossible. But the movie shows us that John Reed is for sure dead. And so if Tonto brought him back to life, that is for sure impossible. Now, again, he could just be saying he was like that, right? We have the unreliable narrator.
Exactly.
But we don't have that in the wraparound segments. So that wax Indian came to life, started talking, and turned into a bird and flew away. That did happen.
Mm-hmm.
I love that we got from Tonto to Santa.
And that's nothing but magic. I'm going to move on to one more point, and it's actually very relevant. This movie is almost 2.5 hours long. Mm-hmm. They should change the name of the movie to The Long Ranger. Am I right? But I think this was a mistake, along with the PG-13 rating. Duly earned, I should add. The Lone Ranger is a property for children. It started as a radio program that became a television show, and I'm sure the audiences for both were predominantly children sitting around their old 1950s era televisions. The old Radiation King. Cowboys and Indians and the shoot-'em-up rootin' tootin' cowboy stuff of that era, those were clearly a property, a genre aimed directly at that time towards kids, especially little boys, but children in general. But this film is not aimed towards kids at all. In fact, seriously, don't show this film to your kids. At 2.5 hours long, it is a grueling slog. By the second act, I'd almost entirely forgotten things that happened in the first act. And by the third, the first act felt like a mini-series ago. Add in some very graphic violence, and I mean surprisingly so for Disney. I felt to show freshly strangled corpses and bodies strewn around the ground, fresh hot urine, and fresh hot horse feces. I thought they completely missed their possible target demographic. Maybe they thought they'd pull the same adult crowd as the Pirates franchise, but from some of the reviews I read, there were a lot of children in the theaters. And if you think about it, that makes sense given the property. So to turn in this graphically violent 2.5 hour film that is sometimes vulgar, sometimes just bizarre for the sake of it, you're really limiting the appeal of what would have been the core audience for this film. And I'm going to rest and let my fabled opponent get his opportunity.
Fabled?
I mean, when you're talking about the content of the film, I mean, I'm glad you evoked Pirates, because that is a great example. I actually just went to the re-release of Pirates for the, I hate saying this, 20th anniversary.
Love it.
When did that happen? What?
Someone very handsome recently recommended it.
Yeah, early July, 20th anniversary. But Pirates of the Caribbean was also very disturbing. It earns its PG-13 rating as well. This was Disney attempting to kind of branch out in that way. And when you watch Pirates of the Caribbean, there's skeletons, there's dudes getting stabbed, arms getting cut off. I don't necessarily know that there is anything in The Lone Ranger that, while I won't suggest that necessarily the content is on par beat for beat, I will say that I can absolutely understand why, after the massive, massive, massive success and beloved nature of the Pirates movies, to the point where kids were dressing up as pirates and everything, why everyone involved in this film went, right, I guess if we keep this PG-13, this kids can handle this. To the same extent, in terms of the content and whether it's for kids or not, this movie had to straddle a very difficult line that I would argue every single blockbuster now has to straddle, and every single live-action film that Disney tries to make has to straddle now, which is worrying about what reactions it's going to get, what think pieces it's going to get, so on and so forth. By its very nature, a Western and the Lone Ranger needs to have gunplay, but you do not want to encourage kids to shoot guns. The original Lone Ranger
kid's really cool.
But isn't the original Lone Ranger is shooting people. And even in the Lone Ranger radio series, they had to come up with a conceit to explain to kids that you shouldn't shoot people. And that's why the silver bullet comes along, because the idea is, well, silver is precious. And that tells you that every bullet you fire, is like life. Life is precious. They come up with all that.
He said that?
That goes back to the early radio series.
Nice.
That's the Lone Ranger has a storied history. I'm not going to sit here and bore you with like stories of Clayton Moore and stuff, but just rest assured, I'm an actual fan of this character. And I go back, the Lone Ranger, in terms of the content that has gone in there, has gone all over the place. And I will say that while you're saying, well, the Lone Ranger was a character for kids, yes. That said, if you go back to those early Lone Ranger radio programs and comic books and books, as I have, there was a lot of content in those that you would sit back and go, you can't show that to kids today because it was made for children in the 30s and the 50s. And so but surely like finding bodies and men hanging, the amount of times that like the Lone Ranger will come across just like a body swinging from a noose in a tree.
I'm trying to compare sort of the violence between Pirates and the other one. And I'm trying to think of the instances in Pirates where grievous violence happens to like regular people. Like, yeah, the zombie pirates kind of lose limbs and stuff a lot, but that's zombified violence. So it's just a little bit different.
I mean,
where it's like
the British people get the shit killed out of them on that boat later. We just are okay. We're just okay. During that, when the zombie pirates were invading the boat, yeah, a lot of dudes.
Because I remember
killed.
Butch Cavendish in this movie is what I think he's on top of the train, or he strangles that dude on top of the train, and his stiff ass corpse just hits the ground with a slam. Like, that rules. Violent as heck. I was like,
but
wow.
I think that, I mean, look, we can talk about violence in westerns in general. I mean, for God's sake,
my point is that what I want to get into is I think there is more cross-generational appeal to pirates, and I think Cowboys and Indians. I think Cowboys and Indians does appeal to a slightly lower age bracket. I think pirates are a little sexier. You can get some sexy pirates in there. You get some cool skeletons.
Or I would actually argue that it's the opposite. When you're talking about the appeal of pirates, pirates had actually been the domain of children's entertainment since the beginning. In fact, the most popular pirate movie of early silent cinema, The Black Pirate with Douglas Fairbanks, only comes about because a little kid was reading the History of Pirates book and talked about how cool pirates were. Adults didn't give a shit about pirates. Whereas Cowboys and the Western has such a history that people who are now, in their 70s, 80s, all of that are going to see Western movies. I mean, if you want to talk about the childlike or not childlike appeal of Cowboys, consider the fact that the Walt Disney Company themselves, less than 20 years earlier, said, okay, Kurt Russell, you want to make a Wyatt Earp movie? It's probably not going to make money. And every single person's dad went to see Tombstone. Right? Like, there is no, I mean, I will sanction a lot of other things, but talking about, well, Cowboys are the domain of children has not been true for decades. If anything, Cowboys and Westerns are so much more an old man's territory.
But Tombstone is a type of gritty Western versus like this Lone Ranger where he's the archetypal hero with the shining star and the mask and the horse. That is much more the domain of like the Saturday morning cowboy kind of thing.
But we haven't had a Saturday morning but we haven't. Well, I mean, I'm saying it in the sense of both of those are films produced specifically by the Walt Disney Company that played to families because dad also wanted to see the cowboy. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. We haven't had a Saturday morning cowboy in decades. There is no new Roy Rogers.
Don't want it. They want pirates.
In terms of the kind of whether we want to say it's okay for kids or not, and look, it was definitely marketed partly to kids. They made a Disney Infinity playset. There were Lone Ranger Lego sets, but at the same time, I would counter that the most marketed to demographic for this movie was the teenage crowd because there was so much Lone Ranger merchandise in Hot Topic, and I can tell you this because it wound up in the clearance bins at Hot Topic, and I bought all of it.
When Hot Topic kids don't want your junk. That's because those kids, they're woke, and they weren't going to fall for Johnny Depp's whitewashing.
No, I mean, I think it was the fact that I think the biggest problem this film had, and I'll get into it in my side more, but I think
that's your time right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've handed it over. I didn't realize this was my time to raise points.
Yeah, you've wasted all of it.
Yes, it is your time.
Well, I wasn't. The judge didn't say it. He was supposed to.
That's what I'm saying.
I didn't want to cut anybody off.
I was waiting to be told. I had the talking stick.
Yeah, I don't like interrupting anybody, so that's my fault.
So can I start raising my points real quick?
Yes,
go for
absolutely,
it. Yes.
Man.
Absolutely. Okay, my number one point, my number one argument for this film. Aren't trains fucking cool?
Ha! Yes.
Come on. The trains are fucking cool. Going back to the earliest days of cinema, not just train arriving in the station, but think about the fact that if you're going through cinema history, right? The threshold where if you're watching old movies, the line in the sand where old movies stop being just historical and interesting and start being actually genuinely entertaining is The Great Train Robbery, right? That is the first like vintage film that you sit back and go, oh, this is actually kind of fun to watch. And you want to talk about violence. A man gets his head bashed in and is thrown off a train in The Great Train Robbery. Look it up, folks. It's 12 minutes long. It rules. And that works because trains are probably the most cinematic vehicle. It rules. It's cool. And what you lose if you try and do CGI or anything like that is that propulsion, that energy. Now, credit where credit is due with this film. Gore Verbinski was able to convince a major studio in 2013 to forego all of the green screens and let him build actual goddamn train tracks and crash actual goddamn trains. And I will say, if you wanted to, and that is a thing we lament all of the time when we talk about movies and what we wish that movies would do. We talk about how we wish that anymore that filmmakers, auteur filmmakers, could get a studio to give them a shit ton of money and make a visual spectacular. And god damn it, you can make all your complaints you want about Tonto. You can make all your complaints you want about the pacing. You can make all your complaints about that. But this movie, whether you like the meat inside that sandwich, the bread of this sandwich being two epic, incredible train sequences, both of which are done practically. Guys were literally running to dodge trains as they were coming down the tracks. I mean, my whole thing with this movie that I thoroughly believe, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, is that I'm going through this movie and the first bit gets me with that first train sequence with John Reed. He's inexperienced. He's fighting on top of the train. And then you're going through the middle part and going, okay, this is fine. This is a solid hero setup, whatever. And I can tell you without a doubt, I get to that moment at the end when they're grabbing Ruth Wilson and they're dragging her onto the train and she's the damsel in distress screaming. And I had this thought in my head as I was watching it going, if this movie were cooler, this would be the moment William Tell Overture kicks in. But they don't want to be, but they're too afraid of being lame to do that. And then sure enough, the William Tell Overture kicks in. And I will say this, I don't give a damn if you want to sit here and tell me, oh, this was the worst movie of 2013. I don't believe it, but you can say that if you want. But God damn it, that 13-minute train chase sequence is one of the best moments of any movie in 2013. The same way we can talk about, is Man of Steel good? Is Man of Steel bad? Whatever. But that moment when that fucking Hans Zimmer score kicks in and he flies over the ice, you're like, all right, I at least have to give it that. And this train chase sequence, I mean, all of the stuff that it's doing, this is the stuff we want from movies that we never get anymore. This was, if anything, and I'll say this, the train chase in The Lone Ranger was the blockbuster methadone that I needed to tide me over until Mad Max Fury Road in 2015. Like that was it. It was just like, oh my God, we can still do this. And of course we couldn't because nobody went to see it and everybody decided it was bad before they saw it. But that sequence, say what you will, train chase. Come on. My first argument, train chase. Come on.
Mr. Bangs, say something smart-ass about trains.
He will.
I mean,
I dare you.
I'll give credit where credit's due. The train scenes kept this film on track.
Hold the contempt, Your Honor.
But they didn't really tie it together.
Jesus Christ.
It's railroad tie, Schlender.
Yeah, we get it. We get it. We don't like it, but we get it.
Wasn't 'cause we didn't
Complain
get
about
it.
the trains at all. The trains were excellent. The way they were done was excellent. I wish they were in another movie.
Now, I will say another point that I will raise with this. See, I think the other thing with this that I like so much about The Lone Ranger, and it's a thing I like about other movies that were poorly received in their time. The closest comparison I have to Lone Ranger for me, a lot of the time I think about is Speed Racer, the Wachowski Speed Racer, which now is having a redemptive arc. People are coming around to that. But it's another movie that when it came out, pretty much nobody saw it because it was a troubled production and everybody had heard that it was bad and we all just had the feeling that it was going to be bad and we all just went, all right, I'm just not going to see it. And then when you actually sit down and watch it, one of the most impressive things that it does is it is actually willing to have a sincere good guy, to have a sincere protagonist. You know, I talk about this a lot with a different thing, and I'm going to evoke pro wrestling if I may, and I apologize to everybody who doesn't give a damn about this.
Yeah, you should apologize to me.
But Maynard loves wrestling.
You're
speaking to him.
I think one of the most admirable and courageous things you can do in pro wrestling is to try and be a pure babyface. everybody wants to be a heel or everybody wants to be a
Means
tweener.
good guy, Ryan.
Yes. Everybody wants to be edgy, so, and because it's easier to win over the crowd because you could be cool. And if you're trying to be a pure babyface, you have to wear your sincerity on your sleeve. And people can reject that for 1,000,001 reasons. So it's I'm not trying to drag anyone in particular, but I'm just going to say it. It's a lot easier to be like a CM Punk anti-establishment, like, no, but I'm the cool guy, than it is to be somebody that's trying to go out there and be like, no, I am a pure good guy babyface. I believe in truth and justice or whatever. And when somebody can get over doing that and they're willing to do that, like over in AEW right now, Willow Nightingale, incredible because she's just a pure babyface. She's just going to be positive. It is so rare to get that in a protagonist. It is so rare to nowadays to see a film being willing to not kind of teeter on anti-hero or to teeter on any of that I do think that, I give this movie credit for the fact that it just decides like, no, our Lone Ranger, like we're going to make him a little out of touch at the beginning because we're going to try and play it. But even then, when you watch the film, it is something where John Reed starts out being like, I'm a man of the law. I believe in justice. I believe in all that. And this whole town is making fun of him for that. And by the end, not to make a pun, but he does stick to his guns in his principles. He is not,
objection, but his principles in the beginning were to arrest people and see that it could and see that they have their day in court. He believed in the law. He didn't believe in carrying around a gun. Now cut to the end of the movie and he's shooting everybody's head off because he's seen that if he tries to arrest them, it doesn't work. He completely lost faith in the system and he didn't stick to his guns. He realized it didn't work that way and he had to kill Cavendish. He couldn't bring him in the way he wanted to.
Well, he didn't even kill Cavendish. He let him loose in the train car, but he didn't.
Oh, don't Batman me that. Don't do
I was going to say that's the Batman thing. That's the Batman thing.
Batman does have to save him, and if
we're
the
not
Lone
mad
Ranger,
at Batman,
and if the Lone Ranger is going to be this pure John Cena radiant source of babyface goodness that you're talking about, then he should have had to stick to his guns. I actually it makes me a little mad that he did kind of switch because he has an arc. To me, it's a bad one. He realizes he does need to carry around weapons and he does need to use violence, that the law doesn't work and he has to act outside the system. But I don't think that's a very good lesson.
I mean, if I may raise a third, my third point, because I know we've run on, but I will just say my biggest thing with this movie, and I will say the reason I ended up watching it, because I didn't see it in theaters. I watched the trailers. I liked the trailers. I thought it looked fun, but even I bought into the hype around it, or the negative hype around it. I bought into the narrative around it. I bought into this is a troubled production. It's probably going to be bad and all of that. I'm assuming some of you might be aware that this film does have a famous advocate out there. I'm sure I'm probably not speaking out of school when I say that. In 2013, when creating his best films of 2013 list, Quentin Tarantino named The Lone Ranger one of the best films of 2013. And that is certainly what put it on my and a lot of people's radars.
I know why. There's a scene when the Lone Ranger first comes back to life that he is barefoot.
I mean, one has to assume that the ivory leg also factors in. But the thing he talked about was
I forgot she was in this movie. What was she doing in this movie? Why was she here?
Setting up her character for sequels that never got made. I mean, really,
we could have shaved off much.
I'll say she is one of the 4 hero clicks they produced for this film that you can find in these blind bags of Lone Ranger hero clicks.
If this movie was an hour and 25 minutes with just as much train sequence, we wouldn't be here right now.
I'm just saying, but my thing is, Quentin Tarantino brought this up as one of the best films of 2013. And he talked about, he was obviously disturbed by the depictions of the slaughter of Native Americans, but he felt it was, important to depict the way that we betrayed these people. He mostly advocated for the train sequences, and he did talk about the fact that one of the things he addressed is these are the kind of things that we all claim we want. We all claim we want movies to put a lot of money in the hands of an auteur and take big-ass swings and make crazy-ass spectacles. We all claim we want that, and then it happens, and then we find reasons to pick it apart and go, well, but it's not perfect. And then what we end up with is those movies are shown to not make money. They're shown to not be worth it. So we just get CGI goop and sequels all the time. I do think that this is a film I have always believed. I watched it with my partner the other night who had never seen it before, and I'm of the opinion that it's a lot of fun. She gave it a 2.5 out of 5. But even she said the one thing that I'm always going to bat for with this And, we're in this courtroom, and I have been told that the burden of proof is on the prosecution to say it is a bad movie. I am not here to argue that this is a great movie or a 5-star movie. I have a lot of fun with it. All I am trying to argue, and the thing I've always believed with this film is, holy cow, when you watch this movie, it is not nearly as bad as you were told it was. It is not dreadful. It is not one of the worst films of 2013. It's got some fun moments. It's got some fat to be trimmed. It's not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination, but all I am arguing is when you divorce it from the troubled production narrative and the antics of its cast narrative, at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of elements of this movie are the kind of things we wish we still got in blockbusters today.
And are you resting on that?
Yeah, sure. I'll rest on that.
All sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Bangs, you may begin.
Johnny Depp, you are white, so your part in this film isn't right. Native folks took the role as a slight, and it's such a shameful sight. There is piss, there is shit, and a funny horse, but it's not what Depp needs to get back on course. Part 4 was a flop. Johnny needs a source of cash for his next divorce. Army Ham was a sham, he felt out of place, really blue, and the screw should have been replaced, but I guess we're just glad he didn't flip his case and bite the new girl in the face. By the time it has come for the jury to tell the score, close the door, and do what they do. If you let this film walk, well, I'll just say I knew that each of you are racist too.
You can hear the crickets.
Wow. Mr. Natale, please present your closing argument, and please, for the love of God, don't sing.
No, you better sing if you want to win now.
It's too late.
The defense would like to first put on the record that he does commend the vibrato on the prosecutor. That needs to be put on the record. For my closing statement, I began this trial speaking about century-old films now celebrated as masterworks, but we needn't look back that far. For people our parents' age, air quotes, bad movies of the mid-century, films like Heaven's Gate, One from the Heart, and Ishtar are synonymous with bad movie, but they didn't see those films. They just knew from reputation. And while our generation is coming to these films and finding a hidden gem, we're also finding out how many of these people could only see these movies through the lens of it's over budget and bad. Gary Larson of The Far Side later apologized for a comic making an Ishtar joke, admitting he was too caught up in the pylon to actually appreciate the movie that it actually was. The list of movies not seen for what they were in their day is long. Chaplin's Limelight was ignored for his legal troubles. The many works of Mabel Normand and Fatty Arbuckle lost to time due to ginned-up tabloid stories, and all the press that made Hollywood snub Citizen Kane and first shaped its reputation, we now all see it as ginned up by the man upon whom Kane was based. But I ask that we think towards the future. At roughly 100 years old, nobody remembers the bad buzz around The General. The stories of budget excess on Fantasia or Apocalypse Now, those are points in its favor now rather than reason for its scorn. 90 years from now, when film fans of the future revisit The Lone Ranger, with all the scandal and the press narrative gone, will they say, it's bad because these actors did bad things? Or will they simply say, dude, you gotta see what Gore did with these trains? I posit the latter, and I posit that we here today have a chance to be on the right side of history with this film instead of being stuck in the past. That is my closing statement. However, I would like to note to the judge and the jury, I am willing to discuss a plea bargain if necessary. Throw it out there.
No deal. Although I am glad that we got a Fatty Arbuckle reference into this case. That is, that's ice cream on top of the pie. Members of the jury, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, and Mr. Hard Bargain Ryan Luis Rodriguez, you have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way. You know, I've been practicing my joke about the Lone Ranger taking his trash to the dump all day, and then Maynard stepped all over it.
Hey, that was excellent. I love when we have singing on the show.
But you never had the bailiff singing, and now you never will.
No, that's true. It's elusive.
Okay, so just like we Texas Chainsaw Massacre short movie, this is a long case, long movie.
Yeah.
A lot to discuss, a lot to dissect here. That's what you get when you get 2.5-hour films. I liked the cases presented on both sides. To me, I kind of agree with the defense's partner. This is a 2.5 out of 5, or as we call it here, a gentleman's 5 out of 10. Yeah, that's not guilty, but there's a lot of things I go back and forth on, because what's good, like the train sequence, is really good, and what's bad and makes me squirm, like the Tonto portrayal, is really bad. Dylan, what did you think?
Yeah, can you believe that Johnny Depp played 90 years old without actually being 90 years old? I mean, I don't know. If you want to be bothered, if you want to be bothered by Tonto, I certainly won't stop you. I mean, we know what Johnny Depp's all about as an actor. I mean, this was 2013 here.
Well, it's more than just his portrayal.
Yeah.
I mean, although that is icky, there's also the way they wrote the character and how they have him look nothing like all the other.
Plus, it's just a bad performance. It's just a not good performance.
See, if you want to argue that it's not a good performance, that's fine. But I don't think I'm just not buying into all this. Like, it's icky and stuff. He claimed to have the ancestry at the time seemingly sincere. Now, that's the real point that Maynard made. This isn't necessarily about a white guy being an Indian or not. It is if their goal was to elevate this character, to transform him into something like better, like really polish him up. Yeah, that didn't work because Tonto, he comes across as flawed, and but he's juxtaposed to the Lone Ranger. He's not this like shining beacon of a role model. So if that was their intention, and I have every reason to believe it was based on the quotes Maynard had, yeah, that was definitely a failure of intention just based on that.
Failure of execution.
Yeah, exactly. Now, when you do look at the movie holistically, though, I do think there's a lot to like. I do agree with Maynard that it is surprisingly violent. Like, you see when he does the warning shot and it drops the ballast on the two dudes, it crushes their heads. You see their heads are crushed. It's like,
I'm okay
wow.
with that though, because its tone is at least consistent within itself.
Yeah, maybe, but it is a little. I think it is a little jarring for the Lone Ranger. It's not jarring for a Western. Westerns are very violent, and that's the problem. Is I've seen so many Westerns that,
but within itself, in a vacuum, like the defense encourages us to look at it in a vacuum, just as itself, start to end, is the violence out of place? Not really.
Well, I mean, it's just because then he wants his cake to eat it too, because he's talking about how the Lone Ranger is like this pure baby face, but I would argue that this is a darker interpretation of the Lone Ranger. Now, I do think he is a full-on good guy, obviously, taking the law into his own.
That's more my language.
Yeah, exactly. But so there were a lot of interesting points brought up in that regard. So I do think the characterization works though for the Lone Ranger like that. I think Armie Hammer did a good job in. When you first see him, he just kind of looks like he should be playing like a James Bond bad guy, but he actually was able to bring a depth of emotion to this role where you're actually buying like, okay, he's serious about this. He wants to, avenge his brother and everything. So I didn't really have a problem with his performance, and it wasn't really brought up too much in the case, justifiably.
And it's all about Tonto.
Yeah, I mean,
it's almost in the film.
But that's the thing, though. If Tonto's the elephant in the room, and if that's what we're going to hinge the case on, it just like the defense, it did not bug me that much. It's like it's not Johnny Depp's best performance, but that would bring this whole movie down to bad. I can't get there from here. What are you thinking, Ryan?
I am torn right down the middle. I gave this a gentleman's 5, but at the same time, like, I love looking at it. I think that the production design is outstanding. The cinematography is, oh my God, gorgeous. But when you spend this much, it better be pretty. And I like the fact that the score flat out quotes "Once Upon a Time in the West." That's just a sure way to get me on your side. But then you have stuff like Tom Wilkinson showing up, and when he doesn't turn out to be the villain, that would be a surprise. And then you have people that are great, like Stephen Root shows up for 2 scenes and immediately makes me wish that he was in the whole picture. But then you go back to the train chase. That is pure cinema. That is the reason for this movie to be made. And if that is the reason, then I'm glad we got this movie. Not all of it works for me. As I said, it goes right down the middle, but I am so glad that it exists.
So that sounds like a not guilty for me.
It would be an interesting curio if nothing else. In the interest of time, do you think we should start locking in Mr. Foreman?
Yeah, let's start locking in.
All right. I got to say, I do just 2 wonderful cases. I do like it when we have a great back and forth like that. But, at the end of the day, this is not great, but like Mike said, it's about showing that it's not bad. And there is enough meat on that bone. Like he said, the bread with the trains And I do think the way the Lone Ranger is portrayed, and I'm just not as perturbed by Tonto as some other people, I'm going not guilty today.
Mr. Rodriguez?
I think I just basically said which way I'm going to go, but
you always swerve, though.
yeah, I always
do.
But I got to say, Mike put up a hell of a case. The things that I don't like about this movie, Maynard mentioned, but I think that the stuff that Mike did to validate it, I think not completely, but pushes it over into, I wouldn't say that this is a great movie, but I'm glad I watched it for a second time, which I didn't think I'd say about most movies. So
I would never say that about a 2.5 hour movie.
But yeah, I'm going to go not guilty.
Big Ben, it all comes down to you.
Yes.
Well, not really.
My
but,
votes count for 3. I'm basically with you guys. Mike did put up a good case. There's only 2 points that the prosecution raised that I didn't feel had good rebuttals to, but every other one he had a strong defense for. And 2 isn't enough to sink the film. So yeah, a 2.5 out of 5. Not great, but it's fine. I have no problem with people saying it. So yeah, not guilty.
I have no problem with people saying it. The Ben Haslar story.
No problem with people saying. Well, there are some films where you question people.
I'm just giving you a hard time, Ben. You know I love you.
Do I?
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus the Lone Ranger, we have unanimously found the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
Damn you fucking trains!
God, you know Maynard loved the trains too.
The verdict is so rendered. The Lone Ranger is hereby free to go, and I caution its makers not to adapt another extinct IP with no current cultural impact so as to avoid losing another $300 million. Court is adjourned.
Ooh, was this before or after John Carter?
This is after. This is the year after.
Oh,
that was
no!
not good for Disney. Yeah.
Oh, you had to warn them sooner, Ryan.
A movie I defend as well, but
man. Hey everyone, this is Charles Bronson reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Maynard Bangs, would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
Well, I'm not surprised. I know some of the members of that jury, and some of them are full-blown bigots. So I'm not shocked at all. But gosh, I wish this was just the trains. I can't encourage anyone to watch this movie. Watch the train scenes. Don't watch the rest.
All right, thank you for your time. Now we've got Mr. Mike Natale. Is that it? Natale. What are you gonna do? Fight Charlie Bronson? I don't think so. Could I get a word on how you feel about today's verdict?
People all over the world, join in. We all love trains. Love trains. Hell yes.
Right.
Thank you.
People all over the world.
Thank you. Thank you to the jury. Thank you to the judge. I'm so glad you made this decision, and I didn't have to bribe you with this sweet bag full of unopened Lone Ranger hero clicks that I have.
we'll still take those.
Oh,
Yeah,
please.
Fine,
I'll take a
I would like
couple of
one.
those.
I may have asked someone on the Twitter if there was an address for me to send them to as a preemptive bribe, but I didn't need it.
Oh, but that guy was the prosecution attorney. I call foul, sir.
Nor did I need to attempt my plea bargain, which would have been, if you want to declare the film guilty, we have to at least absolve the train scenes. Because again, those train scenes absolutely rip. Look, I'm so glad this happened sincerely because I have always argued for this film, not that it's great, but just truly that it's not nearly as bad as it was made out to be. And if the only thing that this encourages people to do is to revisit films that they heard were bad and they remember the bad buzz around and be willing to watch them kind of with the eye of, yeah, but how will this be viewed in 100 years? I think you're going to have a better time because it's a much more fun and enjoyable way to consume art. So I'm so glad everybody did this. Chugga chugga, choo choo, hi ho silver away.
As being actually Charlie Bronson, I endorse your idea of reviewing movies that got bad press. So thank you very much.
Sure he does.
That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis. Great case, you
Great
two.
case.
Thank you.
Fantastic
Fun case.
episode. Very
Fun
well done.
one. We are short on time. We
Very
got to
well
run
done.
right into it. Mike, congratulations on the win. Now, what has been keeping you busy? What have you been up to?
So I host a podcast. I co-host a podcast called You're Missing Out, a National Film Registry show. That is where we are going through every season, year by year, through the Library of Congress's National Film Registry. Every year, the Library of Congress selects 25 films that they think are culturally, aesthetically, or historically significant. What I really enjoy about doing this is that it means we get to watch films, not just the ones that everybody knows are classics like Star Wars or Frankenstein, but culturally significant films that may not get seen, like High School by Frederick Wiseman or David Holzman's Diary. Some of the folks from Reels of Justice have actually been on the show, and I am hoping to get everybody on at some point or another. We're going to hopefully, once we wrap season 3, be plotting out season 4, and I will be tossing out the list of folks and hoping that these wonderful folks come back on, because I think we all had a lot of fun doing that. You guys can speak to that more than me. I don't know, maybe you had
Oh,
a
it was so
miserable
much
time.
fun. I got to talk about bringing up baby. Are you kidding
Yeah,
me? That was so
yeah.
much fun.
I had a lot of fun. I discussed Sullivan's travels, right?
Yep.
And
And I'll be on to talk about Ghostbusters.
I mean, if you're down to do that in 20 years, we will. There's a lot of films that get there before that.
can we count the
gotta-
Lone
you gotta
Ranger?
book Dylan early.
Can we count the Lone Rangers making the library?
Well, it's interesting.
Congress?
Early on in our show, because one thing that my co-host Tom and I do is at the end of every episode, we suggest a film that should be in the registry that isn't, and we actually submit them to the Library of Congress. Anyone in the U.S. can do that. You can submit films you think should be in. And one of our favorite things to do, and people can find these, is every year when the Library of Congress puts out their list of the films they selected, our producer reads the list. Tom and I don't. And we get on mic and live react to the inductees. So he'll read them off to us, and we kind of respond whether we know it or not. And a couple of the films that I have put forward have actually gotten in. I'm not saying that's just me. Many people have suggested them, and there's certainly.
I'm saying it's you.
No, it's
I'm
just
not-
you.
It's just
I-
I'm
you know-
saying it.
But it is very cool to do that and to kind of talk about that. Now, one of the earliest episodes I did actually suggest the Lone Ranger film serial from 1938. I am sincerely a big fan of the Lone Ranger because I love a lot of these things, these characters, and these stories that used to be so important in America and no one gives a shit about anymore. This weekend, my partner and I are taking a trip upstate New York to go to the Zane Grey Museum. Now, raise your hand if you know who the hell that is.
He's a pro wrestler.
Yeah, Zane
1,
Grey.
2, 3, nobody.
Zane Grey was basically the Stephen King of the turn of the century. His novels like Riders of the Purple Sage and The Last of the Plainsman, Lone Star Ranger helped establish the Western genre. And there's a whole museum to him run by the National Parks Department, and no one knows who the fuck he is now.
Well, we do now,
yeah.
thanks to you.
He was also a dentist.
And a fly fisherman.
And the first one to have a shirtless cowboy on the cover of his book too.
Yes. So anyway, that's all to say, like, if you people are interested in You're Missing Out and the Library of Congress, it's a lot of fun because I like to do a lot of deep dives into that history and the old stuff and dipping into why that stuff. It's essentially the crux of the show and the rule that we have, which is a lot of fun, is as opposed to this program, which rightfully you guys are arguing, is it good or is it bad? My co-host and I go in with the rule that, like, we can't say it's bad. If it's been selected by the Library of Congress, clearly there's something there. So our point is to come in and discuss not if, but why these films matter, and to actually do the work to kind of figure out, okay, if I didn't like watching, I don't know, Gigi, but why does it matter? Like, it was important for so long. Like, what's in there? Last thing I will throw out with that, and I'm so sorry to ramble, but we tried something new this season that was a lot of fun. If anybody here is familiar with the film Greed, the great Erich von Stroheim epic that was originally 8 hours, then 4, then 2, we thought we'd do something a little fun with this one. Rather than just do an episode talking about it, we did a feature-length commentary for it. So people can go to our feed and actually, because it's a silent film, so we're not, tramping on any dialogue. But we did a feature-length commentary. You can find that on our podcast feed, or we have a YouTube channel, YMO Podcast, where you can actually watch Greed with the commentary track and kind of, we hope, give you a lot of interesting information about von Stroheim, about the actors, about, I read the original novel it's based on. I even can tell you some stuff about the MGM lion that appears at the start. So we've expanded beyond the podcast to YouTube. We're on TikTok. We're really just trying to help people find these old classic films. So it's been a lot
That
of fun.
lion smoked a pack a day. And I think Greed doesn't, at least the 4-hour version still exist with stills.
There's the restoration version. It's 4 hours with stills. We chose to do commentary for the 2.5 hour version, both because one, that's
only 2.5.
Yeah,
come on.
we got real loopy by the end. But mostly because, quite frankly, that version is absolutely in the public domain, so YouTube can't copyright strike us on that one. Though they've tried. I've gotten copyright strikes in the past for movies that are in the public domain and had to argue, like, no, this came out in 26, dog. We didn't. Harold Lloyd can't claim this one anymore. So
yeah, suck it, YouTube. Now, I like at the end of your show, you offer suggestions. I like that. On here, we always ask our guests for recommendations as well.
Very smooth manner.
Thank you. So what is a movie that you think people should see?
Well, I was trying to be on theme with this. I mean, I have a lot of movies that I go to bat for, but I was trying to think of something that, what the appeal is to Lone Ranger for me. And this is a film that I think some people might have seen. It's a Robert Altman movie, but it's one of the lesser Altmans from that 70s Miracle run. I think everybody's kind of seen, or most people have seen, Nashville or MASH or even Popeye. But I want to go to bat for Buffalo Bill and the Indians, or Sitting Bull's History Lesson. It's another 2-hour movie, but Paul Newman as Buffalo Bill, even though nobody is credited by the name of a real person. They're all credited as just the star, the producer, the actor, all that. It's an incredible film that is all about deconstructing the Western. We just spent a lot of time talking about a movie that is all about Western mythos, the inaccuracies of Tonto, the romanticization of the West. Buffalo Bill and the Indians is a film that is critical of how the real life Buffalo Bill kind of created this romanticized version of the West, and basically points out what a sad, drunken fraud he was compared to Sitting Bull and these great indigenous people who really lived these incredible battles. I highly recommend folks check it out because it's just an incredible portrait of what these Wild West shows looked like at the time. It's beautifully crafted in a very dark and dimly lit way. If you're a fan of Altman stuff, especially like McCabe and Mrs. Miller or anything like that, like this is a really, I guess the only way I can describe it is lovingly angry film.
And it was made
America
during the year of the bicentennial, because
Yes.
that is the kind of guy Robert Altman is.
Yep,
God bless
yep.
him.
Yeah, I feel like this film is considered a lesser Altman, and I really think folks should check it out. It's one of the great indictments of our romanticization of the West. So that's
we
my pick.
consider Ryan lovingly angry as well. So for my recommendation, this is not today's movie is not Gore Verbinski's only Western featuring Johnny Depp. There is at least one more. So for my recommendation this week, I'm going to recommend Rango from 2011. A young pet chameleon gets lost in the Mojave Desert, where he must protect a small town's endangered water supply from various reprobates and ne'er-do-wells. This is a simple retelling of the lone gunslinger trope with the twist of the case of mistaken identity, as Rango is not the sure-shot sheriff everyone takes him for. Done in CGI animation, I know, blah, it would have looked so much better hand-drawn. And a family-friendly PG rating, which it almost lost for having too many instances of characters smoking. But there's something great for everyone of all ages here, as the film makes several clever homages to great westerns of the past, going so far as to have a Spirit of the West character who resembles a certain man who lacks a certain name, if you catch my meaning. And the cameo of Raoul Duke, Johnny Depp's character from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, is sure to go over the heads of all but the coolest acid-dropping 8-year-olds. Plus, this film won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, so it must have something going for it. So if you want to check it out, head on over to Paramount Plus. Rai Guy, why don't you give us your recommendation?
My recommendation this week is an Indian Hindi language film from 2007. It's Farrah Khan's Om Shanti Om. The picture opens in 1977 as a featured extra on several Bollywood movies, a man in love with one of the biggest movie stars in the country. Through a series of circumstances that I shan't try and elucidate, he and she are murdered, and he is immediately reincarnated. That's just the setup, which arrives 72 minutes into a 168-minute movie. We then flash forward to the present day, where the reincarnated fellow is one of the most popular entertainers in all of Indian cinema, who is then brought crashing back down to Earth when he crosses paths with several people from his past life and encounters the man who killed his lady love. Things get even more complicated when he meets a dead ringer of the woman that he loved, but that is just to be expected. The plot is pretty sparse, but you're here for the delightful performances, the bold, pretty colors, the immaculately choreographed musical numbers, the playful, cheeky tone, the sheer maximalism on display. It was only my second Bollywood film that I've ever seen, and if I could track down more, it will not be the last. Om Shanti Om is currently streaming on Netflix. Yuck.
You guys want me to keep watching all these 3-hour movies. Mike wants me to watch a 4-hour silent movie of just still frames.
Ryan, can I just compliment your suggestion for a moment by saying, all the hot girls, put your hands up and say,
That's from the movie,
Shanti Om. Yes, that is the title song.
Very well done, sir.
Right.
It's like a 9-minute long musical sequence.
It's amazing. It's
There's
so
only
good.
one spot for a singer on this show, and it's Big Ben. Speaking of Big Ben,
No, he does it better than I do.
What's your recommendation?
Since Mike was brave enough to come on our show and reveal how much he likes a critically maligned film about the American frontier, I'll be brave enough to do the same and recommend Almost Heroes, which is famously Chris Farley's last film. Sometimes you and the people you are with are just in the right place at the right time with the right mindset to have a film imprint itself on the group and become something you can all reference as your common language for decades to come. And for my family, Almost Heroes was one of those films. Just like Darmok and Jalad were at Tanagra, so too for us was The Bear worse than when the nose itches. That's a joke for Dylan. Thank you. I'm glad he got it.
I love it.
Of course, all eyes are on Farley, who delivers just as energetic performance as we've come to expect from him, but I think Matthew Perry also deserves more credit than he's been afforded for not playing Chandler Bing in all of his roles. His take on Meriwether Lewis is so prissy and funny that whenever I'm at a Lewis and Clark museum reading entries from their journals, I can't help but hear it in Perry's frilly voice. And if you're familiar with the history of Lewis and Clark at all, the film makes a lot of great nods to the actual journey. This film essentially fell off the planet, though. I did manage to grab a DVD copy before it did so, but for everyone else, thanks to Dylan's favorite platform, Tubi, which thrives on these kind of films that nobody watches, but the commercial breaks can afford Matthew Perry's fraction of a penny, that's where to head to see this film.
I love it.
Walk, so Matthew Perry may earn half a penny. So Dylan, what have you got for us?
Well, it was so easy to find Westerns on Tubi, and this is one of them. Starring none other than the greatest of all time, Charles Bronson, Chateau's Land is a 1972 revenge Western that brings surprising depth to the genre. Bronson, you could argue, is miscast as a half Apache warrior given his Lithuanian ancestry, but the real takeaway... Yes, I know, and you'd lose. But the real takeaway from this movie is the dynamics at play in the posse led by Jack Palance. Because you see, in Civil War movies, the specter that lingers over Westerns is often the Civil War. This is typically played to explain why seemingly every man or farmer is so good with a gun, right? He's a war veteran. But what Chateau's Land does is explore what is essentially Civil War PTSD. We certainly didn't have the language for it in the late 1860s. We barely had the language for it in 1972. But that is what we are looking at in the posse that is hunting Chateau. One of the quotes, "The war had nothing for it and nothing after. This is a poignant lament by one of the most vile men on this movie. The hatred, racism, and trauma ooze from this posse. They are all given interesting moments that flesh them out, and we as the viewer are exposed to just how vile and craven they are, but they are also all wounded from the war. I really can't get over how many layers are in this movie. Much like a future collaboration between director Michael Winner and Charlie Bronson, Death Wish, we get a true character piece that is often remembered, unfortunately, for its more exploitive elements and not the heart that we get to see on screen. Of course, there's a lot to nitpick about this movie, but ultimately it is about flawed men, evil men, and what they do when their scars are more than reminders. They are omens. When their old wounds are opened and they do not heal, they just bleed. Streaming on Tubi. Watch it tonight.
You got to get some like vitamin A, D ointment. That'll knock it right out. No problem. But with that, we are all out of show. But we want to thank our guest, Mike Natale, for joining us. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate getting to successfully defend one reviled modern Western.
That's right.
That's right. It was your second bite at the apple.
Right, we're going to have you back for a third Western with secret train tracks in the desert, number 3.
I've been racking my brain to think about what other Westerns I could defend.
As long as it has secret train tracks in the desert and something to do with the Transcontinental Railroad. By the way, writers, other things happened in the Wild Wild West besides the Transcontinental Railroad. But all right. I see I didn't have time to do this whole movie. But we look forward to having you back again. And we hope that everyone else will come back as well as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count it.
Choo-choos!
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.